Welcome back. You're watching Political Exchange, where we're unpacking the impact of corruption on South Africa's ability to deliver services and grow the economy. Dave, before the break, we were talking about the fact that in many instances, particularly in departments such as health and education, national departments have very little powers in terms of implementation. They're largely policy departments. And given the weaknesses within provincial governments in terms of capacity, obviously it's a very big hole. And, you know, those who seek to corrupt the system will go for where the system is weakest. There's been a lot of talk about, redefining provinces, but also quite a lot of resistance, precisely because a lot of these patronage networks are, in the provinces. If we were to beat back corruption in a systematic way, do we need to overhaul the provincial government as we know it, or do we just need tighter implementation of the existing laws?
Look, I'm not, an expert by any stretch of the imagination on public administration and the optimal degrees of centralization and decentralization. What I do know is that, it's put down very often to incompetence, bad systems and people not capable of managing the systems that are in place. I'm sort of skeptical of that as a major driver. Only in the sense that, say, one would expect Gauteng, which has arguably the best skills base in the country, to be a reasonably effective provincial administration. And it's not. I mean,
particularly in health.
The healthcare system in Gauteng is arguably at least as bad as the healthcare system in Limpopo. You could argue about why one has been put under administration and the other hasn't, and you could speculate about that. But quite clearly, it's not purely a question. It's not purely a matter of the skills base. It is a question, I think, of patronage networks. Any attempts to change the provinces now, I'm sure, would be met with enormous resistance and enormous reactions within the political establishment, because they have become, major sources of patronage. I think there's reason to suspect that they've become sources of funding for political parties. So the provinces are a problem, and I can kind of understand why anybody would think that one way of curing the problem would be to get rid of the provinces. But I do understand, again, that there is an argument for the decentralization of the provision of certain services, and there may be for education and health services. I'm not sure why particularly. But they always have been, and that's, I suppose, one reason why they're kept they're kept the way that they are. But it makes it very difficult for the centre to control. Not that the centre has necessarily always proved to be such an exemplary administrator.
Yeah, let's look at the sphere even lower than provincial government, which is municipalities. We know that the South African municipal workers, they're busy canvassing right now to strike, and the reasons for striking are two reasons. One is around a wage curve implementation that they believe the employer has agreed to, and the second is to protest the extent of corruption in municipalities. Now, we've seen the Auditor General's report on the terrible state of municipal finances within a global context where there is pressure on public funds. You spoke earlier about small town corruption being something that is reported, as a site to your organization. Municipalities, local government, that's where the tire hits the tar, that's where people interface with government. What is the extent of the problem there, and are the drivers of corruption the same at municipal level as they are, anywhere else?
I think that they're similar. Municipalities are in a terrible shape. I mean, we're eliding slightly in our conversation the distinction between service delivery and corruption. I think that they often coincide, and the one is often a cause of the other. They're not necessarily identical. Not all instances of service delivery are due to corruption, although I think it's probably true to say that whenever corruption is present, service delivery will be compromised. The municipalities are major sources of corruption. In terms of the reports that we've been getting in one province of this country, you would imagine that every town manager in every dorpie is carefully appointed by the people in the leadership of the province, and one has to wonder why. It's because because there are that many complaints about nepotism in appointments in this particular province. Yes, so municipalities are major sources of service delivery, they're major sources of nepotism in appointments, they're major sources of corruption, and they're major sources of service delivery protest, so-called. This is the euphemism that we have used, often a euphemism for corruption, and a huge economic cost, incidentally. I mean, you have to factor just simply the cost of policing those into the system. But yeah, I mean, there's sanitation and roads and houses and a whole bunch of absolute things water that people take for granted are to be delivered by the municipalities, and they are undoubtedly their service delivery is compromised by rampant corruption, and it has the same patterns of patronage, as I say, inappropriate appointments, and then people who are just, they know. I remember as the director on the board of a company that provided service delivery in Johannesburg, somebody in an informal settlement, 50 families get a job building the fence around the electricity substation. They know who gave them the job. They know who to vote for in the next ward elections to ensure that they get the job the next time round, that person, and so up and up and up it goes. So it's very pervasive at the municipal level. But it is very clearly noticed. I mean, for people in the suburbs, corruption is something that happens behind the high wall of the person living in Saxonwold, who's supposed to be guilty of corruption. In the small towns, they can see where the tar road whose house the tar road goes to. They can see who is driving the car that appears to be above their station in life. So it's very evident there, and that's where the protests are taking place, and where we are getting our reports from and our complaints from.
Often when we speak to government officials about corruption, they at pains to say that, the state is doing a lot to deal with corruption, that South Africa is not unique, that you see this phenomena in developed countries, whether it is America, whether it's Italy, whether it's in other parts, of Asia, a place like India, for example, where there's massive economic growth, but corruption is almost kind of, part of the DNA of how things are getting done. And there's a way in which one has to kind of factor it in when one does business. Is that just realpolitik, or is that just an excuse for us to say we there's a way in which we must just let it happen because it's part of life?
I don't think so. We were talking about small towns a minute ago. The part of life that corruption is also a part of life that is very unfair to those at the bottom of the scale. It's really exacerbating of inequality. I mean, it's those who rely on public transport, public housing, public health, public security. These are the people who suffer the consequences of it. So it's all very well to say, well, yes, let's just pay the tax, but the tax is actually paid by people least able to afford paying the tax. That view that you've just put forward now used to be a fashionable view in the World Bank that used to distinguish between the efficient corruption of a Korea and the inefficient corruption of a Zaire. It's no longer a very popularly held view, partly because of its distributional consequences, and partly because it has a way of getting out of hand. I mean, South Africa, yes, corruption happens everywhere. Today I read about corruption in Canada, for God's sake. I mean, corruption happens everywhere. Large developing countries have been responsible for some of the largest instances of corruption in developed countries. But South Africa is kind of sliding down the scales and the various ratings that there are. And that's disturbing. We have a long way to go before we reach the bottom, which may be cause for laughing. It also may be cause for real concern about how far we could still go. I think, though, that what we're seeing is huge public outrage about the level of corruption, and it comes from the bottom. And I'm pleased to say it comes from people at the top as well. And I think that's the best reason for combating it. It doesn't matter whether we're doing better than some or worse than others. It's not a happy situation for this country, and it has to be dealt with. I have no doubt that it's impacting on investment. I was told the other day by, I think it was Brand South Africa, who sort of responsible for marketing South Africa's image abroad, that it has replaced violent crime as the number one generator of a bad image abroad. That must impact upon investment. The fact that we saw investment in mining declining during the greatest commodities boom in living memory, where in every other country it increased, has definitely got to do with the sort of insecurity of property rights in mining, and that definitely has something to do with corruption. So it's not easy to make an argument for saying let's tolerate corruption and let's view it as a tax. It's also a very uncertain tax, and that's what you get when you have, as I say, this parallel set of rules running alongside the main set of rules. You don't know really for sure what the parallel rules are. You can't go to court on the basis of enforcing the parallel set of rules. And so you have a very uncertain set of property rights, of punitive sanctions, and this is not good for investment, it's not good for trade, it's not good for public confidence. And it's particularly not good for public confidence. I mean, I feel that one of the greatest costs of it is that the public begin to distrust the leadership, both of the public sector and the private sector.
Of course, and if that public trust is eroded, you have, the consequent impact on the way in which democracy is actually lived out. Dave Lewis, thank you so much. We have run out of time. Unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it. That's all we have time for tonight. Join me again tomorrow night for another edition of Political Exchange. I'm Karima Brown. Goodbye.